Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for braving the cold. I saw many of you were dressed up like polar explorers to come here to the Met. This is a warm room of welcome, and we will have a great talk and lecture tonight. My name is Max Hollein. I'm the Marina Callan French Director and CEO of the Met. And what we want to do tonight is basically have Frida Escobedo, our great architect of our new Tang Wing, the Wing for Modern and Contemporary Art, present her plans to you, share some of her inspiration for her designs, talk to you about where she comes from in regard to her ideas for the wing, but really also kind of address some of the different approaches, how her design for the wing kind of developed. And obviously we could not be more pleased with what we have now as a design for the wing, which we revealed for the first time in December with a couple of images, but you will be the first ones now to see more and a deeper dive into her ideas and her work. I want to say that the Met has, of course, a rich history of architectural development. You know that this is not one building. The Met is, of course, a vast building, but it's actually 21 different wings. It's different campuses, different phases of architectural development, different architectural styles also that are composed in one piece in that context. So in a way, this building is an ever-evolving artwork, an ever-evolving piece that we take good care of. And so we wanted to have an outstanding architect, Frida Escobedo, think about how this building could be further developed, how we can further, in that sense, expand our idea of showing modern and contemporary art here at the museum. This is in conjunction with an overall major campaign here at the museum over the next basically 8 to 10 years, where we'll do a lot of changes and reimaginations of our gallery system. Many of you hopefully will be excited and in late May to see the reopening of the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing that houses our Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, completely reimagined, completely new installation. We will then also reopen in 26 our Ancient Near Eastern galleries, also completely reimagined and redeveloped. And we are working on new galleries off the Great Hall and a new development also on the plaza level with a new entrance on 83rd Street. So a lot is happening and much more, but probably the biggest and most complex project in that sense is the new wing for modern contemporary art, the Tang Wing. And when I say that, it is because, on the one hand, I think also for an architect like Frida Escobedo, this is, of course, as we think, a fantastic commission, such an exciting thing to do. On the other hand, it's also one of the most complex commissions that you can take on in the city of New York. So yes, you're building a new wing for modern and contemporary art at this seminal institution. This museum, we cannot move one more inch further into Central Park. So basically what we do is we tear down a certain part of an existing building, build it up again, create a completely new, improved environment for galleries for modern contemporary art. With that, we are actually increasing also our space for modern contemporary art by probably about 40%, so it will generate about 70,000 square feet of galleries. But it also is, of course, not a building that's a standalone unit. It is connected, directly connected to the rest of the museum. So it's a very complex, actually, undertaking to not only build a new wing where an existing wing existed, but also how to best connect that to the rest of the building so that we can make these powerful connections that we want to do here at the museum about the art of our current time and the art of the past. That we can also make these powerful connections, how you seamlessly navigate through the museum, how you meander through the museum and suddenly you're in a completely new gallery environment, and also how we create perfect gallery space for contemporary art, an art form that keeps evolving, keeps expanding, and where this gallery space, we want to have that really architecturally defined and also kind of have different ways of how it articulates actually a framework. So I think that Frida, and you will hear more about that, of course, Frida Escobedo stands out as an architect. because of her, on the one hand, deep understanding for art, and especially also contemporary art, for culture, and also for spaces that are for communities, that basically allow us to come together and that have a very kind of strongly charged environment. And on the other hand, she is also an architect who deeply understands materials, up to the smallest detail, understands what kind of atmosphere materials can have, how basically also that is important in a micro level to already define the macro level of navigation, connection, and also an architecture that basically shows continuity with the rest of the building, even if it's being built anew. I want to say also that this building, this design, is of course also the work of many who are working on this project. So of course, Frida Escobedo and her team, a team of Met curators, buildings department, a lot of different people who worked, of course, together with Frida Escobedo. I also saw that Thomas Waltz is here, who's our great landscape designer who's working on this project. So many people have worked on this project and where we are now with the design. I also want to say it's been great to work with the Parks Commissioner and Parks and with Central Park Conservancy on kind of how we best position this building in also connection with Central Park. It sits there in a very exposed environment. And while I would say currently the current part of that building, the south west wing of the museum, probably looks a little bit like a prison to the outside. We're going to make that much better. And that's something that Frida will also make sure happens. You will hear Frida on stage in a minute. And then she will be joined by David Breslin, our Leonard Lauder curator in charge of the Department of Modern Contemporary Art, who has worked with Frida now for over 2 years, also on this project and design, and has been also his vision and his kind of deep understanding of not only, of course, modern contemporary art, but also how it connects with architecture. It has been so helpful in developing these plans where they are right now. So I want to thank, of course, also David and the entire, again, Met team who's worked so tirelessly on this. Finally, I want to say it's not a cheap project. So I want to thank all the trustees and donors who have made this possible up until now. We've raised a significant amount of money for this project. And some of our donors are here in the room. So I want to thank them really for their support, for making a dream possible, and for making sure that the Met is able to present the modern contemporary art in conjunction with the overall cosmos of art that the Met provides in the best possible way. The Met is this one, yes, thank you for this support. So different to the Louvre, different to the Prado, different to the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna or the Hermitage or whatsoever, the Met is this one encyclopedic universal museum that always collected from the beginning of art, from the beginning of culture in that context, up until the now. We always had also the art of our time be part of this kind of environment of art and artistry that we want to make sure that we reflect on. So in any other city, the Met's collection of modern contemporary art would be the very best in the city. But it just so happens that in New York City, there are a couple of other institutions who are not bad either in modern and contemporary art. And so we want to make sure that our presentation of the art of the 20th and 21st century is not only unique, it's special, it's global, it's transhistorical, it's transcultural, and it basically gives you a very different, additional way of how you can experience the art of our time and the art of the last century in this very city of New York, where basically, especially the 20th and 21st century are so important and have been so importantly reflected in the art of our time. So I couldn't be happy to have Frida having joined us here on this, so to say, trip, and I want to invite her now to the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max, for the really warm introduction. And it's wonderful to have everyone here. As Max says, it's not easy outside, so thank you for joining us tonight. It is truly an honor to stand here today to share my work, and actually it's a dream come true for many of the architects that will be here, so I still cannot believe that I'm doing this commission right now. And of course, some of the catchphrases that inescapably accompany the announcement of this project are first woman to design a building at the Met, or first Latin American to be entrusted with this responsibility. And yes, leading... Thanks. And I have to tell you that, yes, leading an architecture practice as a woman in Mexico or anywhere in the world is a journey that comes with many challenges. And while I'll hope for a time when those distinctions no longer feel necessary, I am deeply grateful for the trailblazing women-led firms whose contribution have paved the way for moments for this to happen. Many of them have become dear friends and mentors, so thank you. You know who you are. And I also take immense pride in being part of the Latinx community, especially the vibrant Mexican community of New York City, whose significant contributions from service industry to caregiving and from science to the art enrich the cultural fabric of the city. And to you, I say, our contributions have always been and will continue to be fundamental to the city's identity, even in the face of the challenges we're confronted with today. So New York has always been a city of... New York has always been a city of immigrants, and of course the Met, as one of its most central and intrinsic institutions, has fittingly been described by James Panero as a city within a city, a cosmos for the cosmopolitan, a home for culture, owned by no one and belonging to all. In the 150 years in its founding, the Met has witnessed a profound transformation in the meanings, art, audience, and even the concept of museum itself. And it's under the visionary leadership of Max Hollein that the Met has embraced these challenges with clarity and purpose, rising to the challenge of staying relevant in a world that increasingly values connectivity and diversity. Being entrusted for such a historic project is, as I said, a privilege and an honor, but is also a big challenge and responsibility that I luckily share with an incredible team. Yes, my perspective emerges from a specific intersection of gender and geographic origins, and while a substantial part of my work is now outside of my home country, Mexico, it continues to inform my practice. However, I have always considered my job to be a collaborative practice, and it has been informed and layered by the conversations that I have with my team. And for this project in particular, it has been informed also with a larger team at the Met and all of the stakeholders involved in this project. So, this is the team, yes, thank you. So what happened at the beginning of the journey? We started wanting to learn and understand the complex web of relationships behind this project, so we moved the studio to the Met for a year. Our office was located right above the main hall, right in between these two vaults. And on one early morning, I remember Brett Gaillard, head of capital projects, opened this little door that led to the top of one of these vaults. And we could hear the murmur of the people in the Great Hall, but not see them. And it's one of my fondest memories of that time here at the Met. We had numerous encounters and conversations with all of the Met teams, and we were able to experience firsthand the flow and movement of the museum. And all of this is to say that it is outstanding to see the number of people involved in this project, and it only reaffirms my conviction that this endeavor can only be possible acknowledging all the contributions that each one of us have made. So from that point of view, and in every perspective, this project is really about weaving connections. With this project, we of course want to highlight and give new life to the 20th and 21st century collections of the Met and carve out more opportunities to put them in conversation with other areas of the museum. That is, to weave them together with the largest tapestry the museum is. I believe that weaving connections can allow us to recognize and celebrate the common threads that run across different times, geographies, and ideologies. And in doing so, we may find spaces for self-reflection and connection with others. So our proposal for the new Tang Wing is designed to build upon the material history of the museum. However, our approach is not a nostalgic continuation of the past, but the search of layers of information that can give a new reading of the present and, as a result, the future. The Met, as one of the most relevant sites for culture on a global scale, contains inherent pluralities that could and should be manifested in physical space. This idea resonates with what Martinican writer Edouard Glissant names mondialité, a term that promotes a global dialogue without erasing the idiosyncrasies of particular localities. It is essential for us that the Tang Wing can speak of its own history and the context that surrounds it, the museum, the park, and the city, and it's also crucial that it expresses the ever-expanding relationships that it contains within. The Metropolitan Museum of Art presents a full history of art across a complex of buildings designed in a wide range of architectural styles, ranging from Gothic revival to Beaux-Arts to late modern and finally contemporary. So in our proposal, we want to preserve the corner that serves as an anchor between the glass volumes by introducing a sculptural mass that reveals itself as an accumulation of modules. The existing footprint is replaced also by preserving the symmetry in a plan to the American wing proposed in the Roche-Dinkeloo master plan. The Kevin Roche master plan introduced an important pattern of solid and void, solid, that completes the museum's footprint. Our design maintains that pattern and introduces a new architectural language inspired by the museum itself and the collection that the new Tang will house. This rhythmic pattern of aggregation creates a dynamic interplay of light and shadow, and at certain moments, the limestone tiles are arranged as a celosía or masravilla, a traditional breeze wall, rooted in Mexican architecture, but influenced by Arabic and North African heritage. And this allows us to diffuse views into the park. The resulting opaque and porous surface mediates the facade's layer history, signaling that the museum embraces a multiplicity of architectural expressions that echo the broader constellation of human culture. We can see in precedent images and examples of Mitla and Chanchan or Huaca Pucllana how the repetitive motifs are constructed by small fragments of stone, and even though the pieces are different from each other, it is a binary system, shadow and light, depth and relief. These binary iterations resemble, to me, the craft of weaving, and are particularly inspired by the work of incredible artists such as Jody Archibald, Olga de Amaral, Annie Albers, and so on. The inherent structure of weaving, defined by the intersecting grid of vertical and horizontal threads on the loom, became a starting point for exploring some geometric patterns and highlight the seamless connection between form and function, and between structure and inscribed meaning. The modular facade also signals the relationship between artisans and builders and the building itself, or craft versus industry. A piece that we have presented as a precedent before and that illustrates this duality in a brilliant way is Lattice de Tour by Mexican artist Hector Zamora for the Roof Garden Commissions in 2020. Zamora recognizes the labor of bricklaying, signaling the fact that building physical space necessarily implies the construction of a social space. The facade of limestone modules in our building gradually decrease in size from the base to the top, emphasizing a forced perspective and recognizing that there are many different scales and degrees of proximity from where we can experience the building. The lower, larger sections respond to the urban scale, and as we move up in the building and experience the facade up close on the 4th and 5th floor terraces, the size and proportion corresponds to the proportion of the human hand. The mediation between scales indicates a particular correspondence between the industrial fabrication and handcraft. On numerous occasions, I have quoted Brenda Lozano, the writer, Mexican writer. During an interview, she said her work was very similar to that of a bricklayer, putting one word next to the other until you build the text. If we flip the metaphor, the work of an architect is to build a relational field of functions with an open meaning. I became increasingly interested in the idea of finding maximum of expression through a minimum of words, very much like concrete poetry. The repetition of a singular module reveals nuances of the characteristics of the material and the subtle changes of light during times of the day and different seasons. So for the Tang Wing, we selected limestone, the main material used at the Maurice Hahn McKim Mead and White buildings on Fifth Avenue, and each one of the limestone modules speaks also about the process of sourcing and construction. The exterior face is split rock, and the inner sides of the modules are saw cut, reducing steps of fabrication to the minimum while adding a lot of richness to the facade. The rough texture of the split rock face highlights the different tones and veining of the stone and playfully interacts with the shadow cast by the surrounding trees. At some moments, the facade turns into a screen, allowing for discrete views to the park and into the exhibition spaces, while at some others, it remains an opaque wall with different module depths. From a diagonal perspective, both of them are undistinguishable, creating the illusion of a diaphanous light mass. But the articulation of the mass actually responds to a series of very complex interior relationships. The Tang Wing sits at the intersection of two wings, Kravis and Rockefeller, and between special exhibitions and 5 different collections, including European sculpture and decorative arts, 19th century paintings, arts of Africa, Oceania, and ancient Americas. In the current configuration of the wing, the circulations actually separate rather than connect. Many of you have experienced the spine. And the primary reason is that they're situated at the perimeter of the space, alongside with services and retail spaces. The natural flow and cadence of the Met, which resembles a medieval town with small streets and plazas, and where one can seamlessly traverse different timelines and geographies, is interrupted in this corner, turning it into almost an island. So the navigation strategy was to consolidate the circulation and services into 2 main cores that run north-south of the building, allowing galleries to frame the perimeter of the wing and allowing for moments of surprise and juxtaposition, as well as threads of continuity between adjacent buildings. The 2 main staircases are situated at opposing corners of the wing and framed by large filter views to the park, inviting people to reconnect and relocate themselves with the city and the park, working as a palate cleanser before continuing the experience of navigating through the galleries. A grand gallery will connect our wing with what now is Patrick Court Cafe on the north, resolving the cul-de-sac condition and allowing for speedier and more direct connections to the roof garden commissions. We have 3 main ways of visually connecting to the park: filter views, as one of the ones that we see here. The second ones are frame views to the park with galleries that act as rooms with a view, like the northwest corner gallery on the first floor. The relationship between building and landscape here is fundamental. The liminal space of the facade is extended to the landscape, and together they both work as an expanded threshold, a permeable zone of exchange. As we move into the upper floors, these rooms with a view frame the iconic and beloved views of Manhattan that people enjoy today at the Cantor Roof Terrace. So in the proposed scheme, a new terrace is added into the program. The first one will be primarily dedicated to the exhibition of art with the annual roof garden commissions, and the second one, located on the 5th floor, will act as a gathering space where people can enjoy moments of encounter, respite, and restoration. So as a conclusion and a way of starting up my conversation with David Breslin, I would like to say that we're hoping to create a building that possesses certain fluidity and that proceeds from an excavation of the historical, social, and material layers of the site. This necessarily involves a reflection of time, an interpretation of existing traces, and a concern for the ones that the project will leave behind. A building that will bear the marks of duration, life, and weathering that reveals that no architecture is ever static, but constantly changing, shifting, and adapting. A building that recognizes the idea of continuous becoming, what was, what will be, but more importantly, what is. So with that, I would like to invite David Breslin to the stage with me.
Thank you for that great talk, Frida. It's always a pleasure and a revelation to hear how you're thinking, and for many of us who get to work with you every day, we learn something, so thank you and your whole team for this great project so far. We have many years to go, so.
A few.
So I wanted to start by asking you, but actually really telling you an anecdote. When people ask me how I think you're doing, I immediately say, great, brilliant, it's a fantastic project. But then I say, well, let's break this down. Frida is designing one of the most anticipated wings at one of the most revered institutions in the most opinionated city at a site that touches the most beloved park. So she's doing great. But in all seriousness, you are managing a ton of constituents. You have a very committed director. You have a number of passionate curators. You have interested neighbors. You have inquisitive finance officers. You have dutiful officials. Name your euphemism and your person. But maybe this question reflects an old-fashioned perspective, given your embrace of collaboration. But how do you manage to maintain a cohesive and directed vision within that context?
Well, I have to say that I still sleep well. And I think it's because of that shift on the paradigm of what an architect is. I think mostly our job is to listen, to be really good listeners, and I'm lucky enough to have an amazing team of people that have a lot of knowledge and experience, but also fresh eyes and a first perspective. So that sparks curiosity. And sometimes we're like these 5-year-old kids, you know, like asking why hundreds of times until we get to the bottom of it. And then where things are not working in terms of code, for example, and you keep pushing the question over and over again, you get away with what you want. So that's one way to do it. But also I feel like we're very lucky to be working with you and with Max, who also understand the power of collaboration. There has been no moment where I felt like there was one singular direction. It was more about creating an overall vision or a path that we could walk together, not like creating the path as we walk it. So I really appreciate that. And also just in general, the Met team has been really wonderful at putting us in front of the right people at the right time to ask some questions where we don't know the answers. And when we cannot find the answer immediately, it has been also this process of working through it together. So I think we're very lucky to have this team that it really feels that the collaboration is a fundamental aspect of it.
Do you ever, and I think I know the answer, but for many people who aren't in that room, there are a lot of voices. There are a lot of opinions. You are the architect. How do you peel away some of what could be, one could say, water down an approach? Because you haven't done that, but it's very hard to do. And maybe this is more of I feel like you're analyst or something. But how do you keep that perspective in mind while being able to get things done? Because that's also part of this. You want to get this built and you want to do it on time. But could you speak a little bit to that, or what you feel like your job is to navigate those relationships?
I think, at the beginning of my career, when I was working on my own and decided not to work for another office, I thought I was making a mistake, because you do need that type of knowledge of how to navigate the situations and how to engage with clients. But there's also a positive aspect of it, because you really need to prove yourself, and constantly weave through all of these opinions. And that actually feels like I became a good listener after that, because you learn to really understand why people are saying no to you and what do they want to hear as a yes. So it's a way of filtering these ideas. And as the office grew and the team got a little bit larger, of course, this became also part of an important conversation that we're always having. And my main job at the studio is to have conversations with my team. And together we can come up with solutions. It's not like it's top down, it's really horizontal. So I think that permeates into the relationship we have with all of our clients. In an institution as complex as this one, that is a fundamental thing to do.
Speaking about that, I thought it was very brave when you decided to move your studio into the Met over 2 years ago. It was the equivalent of going from dating someone to getting married. It was official now, we're doing this. But you were involved in the day-to-day life of the institution in a way that was probably different than you might have expected. I don't know. I would see you and your team in the staff cafeteria. You saw the pictures of you in almost every department, particularly ones that touched on the wing or the conservation departments. But could you talk about how that experience, it's one thing, it's good for photographs to be able to do it, but how did it change your design? How did it change your thinking? And maybe most specifically, how did it change how you thought about the Met and doing this project here?
Well, we have some really great stories. No, the first week that we were here, the security team told us that if we were past 5, we should let them know. And we were like, well, we're architects, it's going to be a little bit later than that. And then it was like, well, 7 p.m. And it was, why don't we just, give us a free pass? We're architects. But I think the whole idea is that by moving here, we were just prolonging a relationship that was already established during the competition. And I think that was something that was really brilliant about how they engaged with all of the competitors. Because we were not just given the description of the project, so we could work with it and then come back. It was more about establishing a relationship. And I thought that was really brilliant in the sense that it was not about the final product, it was the path, how we would walk this path together, because this was new for many of us. So I think that started very early on, and then the natural decision was, of course, to be in the building to really understand all of the complications and the complexities, from the infrastructure to how people work to where people meet. It was actually wonderful to see that the cafe, the cafeteria, the staff caf, is where everyone gets together, from Max Hollein to yourself, to people from maintenance, to us architects that are lost in the building, and need to be guided back into the right elevator. So it creates the sense of community, but it also explains that there are specific hierarchies and then they're blurred, and you can have really wonderful, interesting conversations that are happening in the same space. And I think it's related also to how you understand how many departments are linked and the right moment to get in.
That's great. So you've compared the Met, and you did it in the talk tonight, to a medieval city, its passageways, its intimacies, its palimpsest. And we kind of take this as a compliment, but I wonder if it really is in some regards when you talk about it. If you think of the medieval city, it had disease and plague and had issues with sanitation. But could you talk to us about what that means to you? And in some ways, what the quintessential Met experience is that you wanted to replicate in this wing, or feelings that you had, particularly when you and your team were here experiencing them, that you wanted to make sure that your wing, the Tang Wing, embodied. And also, and you don't have to answer this part, but if there are certain things you didn't want to do, that you didn't want to replicate.
Well, I think it's, you're right. Like, there are a lot of complexities about having these puzzle of endless situations, but I think that's also the magic that can only happen in a place like the Met. Like in other museums, you either have a particular collection or is not connected to the contemporary eye. And to me, that's the most wonderful part of being given this commission. It's not something that is anchored in the past, but it's something that is currently happening. It will leave a trace, but it's very open-ended. It needs to be prepared for the future. So this idea of a medieval town as something that allows for surprise, but also the clarification of the program. Like you find little plazas and streets that allow for this memory of the place to take part. And I think it was about understanding that cadence or rhythm that really worked and putting away the one that didn't work. Like when it becomes a little bit more like a highway or a Haussmannian project in the Met, I think it doesn't work. It needs to be stitching the different areas and the different timelines, because it is the juxtaposition of these different moments that make the space so special. So we wanted to bring that back, eliminating that cross and then creating connections. And it's actually very significant because we are in the cross-section of these two wings, but also with the park and the city. So the opportunity was to weave it not only internally with all the departments that are converging in that corner, but also to give a glimpse. It's almost like you emerge from this experience of getting lost in your thoughts and the experience of art, and then emerging in this very privileged corner of New York City where you're viewing the park and also connected to the Manhattan skyline.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've talked about this already, but I wanted to ask you, because you're such a great architect, as Max mentioned, for this project, because some of your best friends are artists, your references are art objects. The way that you speak about Annie Albers is infectious. That, in some ways you think, when Petrit Lodge talked about you in the New York Times profile, he's like, it's great to have an architect who thinks like an artist. I would love to hear what you think that means. But I wanted to talk to you about, kind of go into the studio for us. And there's a lot of talk about an architectural move, a big gesture, and when one makes one, and when one decides to practice restraint. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the conversations you have in the studio. And if those terms don't work for you, I wonder how you can maybe think about it in a way. We're going to identify this building with Frida Escobedo. Your name will always be attached to it. But it will succeed probably when we're not thinking about anyone but the people that you come with, the audiences, and that relationship to art. How do you balance that, this identification and this distancing from this project?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the dream is for people not to recognize it with a name, but almost like to recognize it with a space, like an experience of a space, for people to really identify it as something that dissolves and is able to absorb some of its context, whether it's the time when it was built, or what was the production of these pieces, like what does it say about the technology at the time or the economy of that time, but not necessarily like, oh, what were the references for this person. It's a more broad constellation of reference that I'm interested in, and because they're like very particular and very personal, they tell the story of someone, but at the same time, I hope that they can become universal, because as you're saying, like, they are very restrained and almost abstract. So the feeling is just like to give an atmosphere that it allows for people to engage with the immediate surroundings and for them to feel how they're sensing the artwork, but also the passing of the day, like to locate them in a very specific moment of time in their lives. So it's about creating connections. And I think it's why it's so wonderful to work in a cultural institution such as this one, because it's also what the curatorial team is trying to establish, is to establish a relationship with a different kind of narrative and to create that type of connection between the artist and the audience. And also we have the park, so it's always about creating those links and sustaining them in a way that will hold the test of time.
Yeah. You've talked about this. I wanted to move into more nitty-gritty about the design, and you've touched on this already, but many people have referred to this project as elegant, and that can mean many things. But when I think about it, I think about how you apply it to a mathematical formula. There's one beautiful way to solve it, and that's the elegant solution. But there's a pragmatism to it. And you've had to deal with a lot of things that fall on the engineering side of reckoning with this particular site. So I wonder if you could actually go into a little bit of the specifics for people interested, I think we all are, about the baggage that you inherited, that you had to work around. Because in those renderings, it looks like it was the way it could be if you started from a tabula rasa, but it wasn't. And conversely, I wonder if you could speak to the opportunities you inherited that you were thrilled about, that you could either work with or push against.
Yes, and maybe we can go back to the previous slide, where you can see the corner condition, which I think was a fascinating problem. Because yes, we needed to have a language that could be new, which could speak of its time, who could incorporate other references of things that are not considered to be the classical canon of architecture that I feel should be present in some of these institutions, but also something that would establish a dialogue between the Roche Tinkalu project, which holds the corner with this mass, and then it's just dividing these two pieces encased in glass with a very strict grid around it, and how we also relate to the Fifth Avenue project with the stone and the articulation and the shadow play that actually create a lot of depth, and it creates a beautiful relationship also also with the park. So the solution was to think about something that couldn't be identified as either or, but something in between. It would be a strong corner, but it is also fluid and porous and open, and it would allow for a certain lightness. And maybe simplicity and lightness are words that I like more than elegance, because God knows what elegance is. But what we can say is something that projects this idea of absorbing, or of being able to let you in also, of feeling more inviting, less like a jail and more like an open space or a pavilion in the park, that feels inviting and warm and generous.
Yeah, I mean, two of the strongest visual statements that you've made and that you've shown in some of these renderings are the celosia that we see so beautifully reflected here, and the coffered ceiling, which you see in many of the interior spaces. And you spoke in your presentation beautifully about the celosia, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit more, because the references that you've spoken about in Mexico and in other geographic locations have a different climate than New York, have a different function. And I wonder why you decided, because you could have made many moves, about that being the right one for New York City and for the Met. And then also the coffered ceiling, I think this is a great image to show this, why that was the right move for this museum.
I think the first move, which was how to create an envelope that would negotiate with these different architectural styles, how it would sit nicely with all of the different styles that form the Met. And it was about creating like this binary dialogue, like shadow and light, in and out, being able to give a glimpse or not. That made a lot of sense. Even though the climatic conditions are not allowing the breeze to come through, we can let the light come through. And there's a really magical thing about being engaged in a celosia, is that it requires your direct attention to really understand like what you're looking at. If you go through in a diagonal, like if you just passed the celosia, it becomes an opaque wall and you can focus on the artwork. But if you shift your attention, then something in the landscape might grab your eye, and then you're focusing on something else. So it requires a certain presence in the space and in the moment. And it also allows you to map certain conditions of the day. It's almost like a mnemonic tool to remember exactly the time of day, the moment where you're looking at a specific picture. How did it felt? Did it felt warm as a spring morning, or it was like a cloudy day and you couldn't see the pattern on the floor because it was all the same. So it was about creating like these moments where you would connect to your immediate environment. And then the second part with the covers was to start to shift away from this idea of architectural neutrality, particularly in the gallery spaces. There's, to me, like this, there is this ideal of how to present art, but is it really just a singular idea? And maybe this is something that we can start discussing, like how do you create the perfect conditions for something? Is it ever a perfect condition? Or is it more interesting to have something to react to and for it to feel identified as something that has a place and a time and that really you can play with? So it becomes almost like a conversation with the architecture rather than trying to create something that feels very neutral. The specificity of the space was very important to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was very important for us when we started engaging with our curatorial colleagues on this project that we didn't hand you a list of 30 galleries with checklists, build spaces for these, but to show that there were multiple possibilities, multiple ways of installing the collection that we're thinking with a set collection, but one that will be building over time. And we have great colleagues here, and there'll be great colleagues at this museum in 100 years if this wing also has to serve. So this idea of multiplicity, of possibility now, in the way that you ended your beautiful talk about the future and the past, but the now, is something I think that you've been really conscious of when thinking about this, which is, yes, now, but also, let's also have these spaces thoughtfully designed for the future. And that's something because it runs a little bit in parallel with the decision that was made early on, which is a little bit different than how a lot of contemporary art museums are being built, which was not to have all the galleries be eminently flexible. This doesn't mean we can't put up a wall here or there to do things or modify the spaces, but the prevailing idea was really to plan for a varied enough architecture from the get-go that provides a rhythm, but also some set conditions. And can you talk about that decision, which we all made together, and what advantages it holds, and how you kind of built possibility or flexibility into it while creating some kind of set conditions?
And I think that was one of the most interesting conversations from the early days, with you and with Max and the curatorial team, like what actually creates real flexibility. And I think we very quickly shifted from this idea of a neutral space, single height, with the Font Palace scheme, like something that would be divided and subdivided in many different ways, but to actually create different conditions for each one of the different formats that are already present in the collection, and just foreseeing so many others. So yes, there are some moments where we have particular dimensions, particularly in the perimeter of our wing, but then there are moments where the flexibility is higher, and because of the conditions of the space, we were also able to achieve different heights, because we needed to negotiate all these different openings, and we had thousands of schemes where we were analyzing what is the right move. Do we expand this slab, or do we shorten this one? So that experiment really led to a combination of spaces that create this friction or surprise that was very necessary. It's almost like understanding the common threads that we wanted to continue or prolong, whether it's the narrative and adjacent wings, but then also how to create a little bit more texture in the pattern, and to allow for these moments of, okay, I go from compression to expansion, or to a moment where I encounter the park, or a moment of silence and introversion, that actually creates a richer experience. And it ties to the whole idea of the Met, because you go from one room that is very generous and with coffered ornate ceilings into a space that is a little bit more neutral, or that really opens up to the park.
I think it's the way that you describe the Celestia as providing this place for memory. I was here this day, I felt this. I think that change in ceiling heights on the same floor also provides this kind of jolting into place, this sense of, I'm here, I changed, I went from a different space, this is a different experience, which I think is very exciting for the art and for the viewer. I know that we have a few minutes left, so I have a couple more questions. One you spoke about a little bit, but I would love to have you speak a little bit more about the relationship to being within Central Park. As Max said, our perimeter is very set, but I wanted to think about how you thought about how your wing should interface with or not interface with the park. And how did you establish what experiences you wanted to have for people from outside, and maybe how they were different from those from inside, looking out?
We started establishing that relationship very early on, and it was related to the idea of circulating through the gallery spaces. And so there's almost like a pinwheel scheme that is happening throughout the wing, with these two long bars that are articulating all of the spaces. And because of the circulations, the vertical circulations are on opposing corners, we wanted to give a sense that we could connect those moments to the park, which is what we can see on that glimpse right there on the corner. So there was this idea that moving vertically could also be a way of connecting different narratives and different ways of engaging with the rest of the building. So the celosía would act as, yes, as a palette cleanser, but also as an invitation of creating these links vertical that were not happening, that maybe there was a floor plan that was joining adjacent spaces, but the conversation between adjacent floors was not present. And then the other idea, there was the room with a view. And the room with a view is changing as we move upwards in the building. The first rooms with a view that are happening on the lower floor rely on this idea that the landscape becomes part of the threshold moment of an extended liminal zone of the facade. This idea that is porous and it's permeable, and it creates different planes of vision that are more contained or more restrained. And then some others, as you start moving up in the building, that create more expansive views, that connect you to the idea of where you are. You're in New York, you're in the Central Park, and finally on the terraces where you actually are in conversation, no? Like you are at the canopy of the trees or over the canopy of the trees, and then you can finally see the whole expanse of Central Park. You can see its dimension, its power, its beauty, and how it's related to the rest of the city, how it articulates the city.
So I have two final questions before people can brave the cold. And I'm not going to ask you to speak too grandiosely, even though this question might beg for it. But there's been a lot of dialogue, I think, since Robin Pogrobin's really thoughtful profile that came out in the New York Times that suggests that your process and your design, maybe even your way of working, signals maybe even a generational shift away from the whole idea of the starchitect. This might be a boring question for you. But do you think there is some validity to this suggestion that this is a move away? Or if you want to address it in a different way, what is the ethos or the spirit that you want your work to signal a move toward?
Well, the idea of the star architect really is horrible, so I'm glad that we're over with that. And to me, it's more about the conversation. I love this job, and I love it so much because it teaches me a lot. No, like I have been able to do a PhD in contemporary art with you. I'm learning about circulation, about safety measures, about code in New York and its complexities and its absurdities sometimes. But it's really about understanding the world. So to me, it's just a way of opening up to new perspectives and really expanding the vision. But that can only happen with a very generous group of people that are doing this journey with you. And I think it's a similar way, no, as we were just saying, like you work in a similar fashion, and that's why it's so easy to have conversations where I feel like really I'm playing, you know, like it feels like something that I really enjoy, but it has good results. We're able to make things on time. We're not just fooling around. Like we were able to get to the deadlines, but it's about to expand, no, the relationships and expanding who you are, dissolving who you are, and being more with others. Yeah.
So my last question maybe picks up and connects to how you started your talk with this, I think, beautiful invocation of who you are here in New York working on this project. We think about this project very much as one for the world, and I think very importantly for all of us here who work at the Met, but also everyone who is listening to this talk here, it's very much a project about and for New York. So now that you're also on your way to becoming a New Yorker of sorts, you have an apartment here, you have about 12 more years until maybe we designate you a New Yorker as well. But could you talk about what this city means to you, and maybe from the architecture component, what it will mean in the future to talk about the Tang Wing as a New York building?
I think the most important part of New York to me is this idea that is a city of immigrants. And that means people that come from all over. It can be from the States, it can be from abroad, but it's a mosaic of cultures. And it's a perfect example that each time someone comes in, it only makes the experience better. It just adds to the complexity and the richness and highlights the differences, but also makes it so easy to understand that we can coexist all together. No? To me, that's something that is brilliant and unique about New York. It has also its very challenging things. No, it can be loud and dirty and scary at some points. But I come from Mexico City, which is very similar. So yeah, I have this feeling that I'm moving in between two very intense cities, and both of them actually complement each other. No, like for example, I've learned that New York is very efficient. It's very pragmatic. It has a speed to it. Like it's just a train. And in Mexico City, it's very intense, but it's very disorganized, and we love to have long sobremesas. So the combination between how to navigate calm and connection, where the idea of you need to get things done has been fundamental for me, and I think it's going to inform the way that I work from now on. But also the idea that the city changes population very fast. You know, like there are, of course, New Yorkers that stay here for their lifetime, but there are also a group of people that are just passing through. So it's a combination of who stays, for how long, what do they provide, what can they say. And I just feel like I'm in this moment where like I'm about to decide like whether it's a long conversation or a short conversation. It's going to be long because I'm sharing bathroom with the Met. Now we're married, but at the same time, yes, it's this question of what is time with people. Who are you encountering with? Who are the conversations that you're having? No?
And this idea of your building being read as a New York building, does that sit with you? Is it a different conversation about how identity rests within architecture? How would you speak to that?
It's a New Yorker because it's in New York, but I think it also has a little bit of a Mexican heart, but also Colombian heart, and like all of the people that are working in the project, whether from my team or from other teams, many of them are here tonight. They come from different backgrounds, and there's a little bit of them in the building, and I think that's manifested, no? Like there are some nuances that you can say, like, well, this is a Mexican building, maybe you can associate it with it, but also there are references to Egypt or Northern Africa or Spain, so who knows, maybe there's more things that connect us than differences that establish who we are. So hopefully that the identity is something that we're very proud of, but is not necessarily relevant to say who we are.
I think that's a beautiful way to end this talk, and to thank you, Frida, for everything, and to thank everyone for coming this evening.
Thank you so much, David.